Where? Minho's voice came out lower than he intended, rougher, cut from somewhere he hadn't meant to open. It moved through the silence of the foyer like the flat of a blade. Do you think you're going? Minho's grip tightened on the banister as soon as his eyes landed on Kate, as her hand reached for the door handle. In 2 years of her working in his home, he had seen her in exactly one thing: her uniform. Kate had never once been invisible to him. He had simply been very, very good at pretending otherwise. Welcome back, my amazing Afro-Korean family. If you're watching right now, kindly tell us where you're watching from. She spun around, startled, clutching the bag to her chest. Her eyes found his across the marble expanse of the foyer, wide, dark, gorgeous, and immediately fiercely furious at being caught. The look lasted only a second before she composed herself, but he caught it. He always caught everything with her. That was the problem. Mr. Yang. Her voice was steady. Almost. It's my night off, sir. He descended the last 3 steps slowly. No rush. There was never any rush when he already knew how something would end. His dark eyes moved down the length of her dress, once, just once, a single controlled sweep, and then locked back onto her face with the kind of discipline that cost him something. In that? The question sat between them like a stone dropped into still water. Neither of them moved. Kate lifted her chin, a small motion, deliberate. Yes, sir. He looked at her for a long, dangerous moment. Then, quietly, almost to himself, almost like the words had slipped out before he could decide against them. Who is he? Kate blinked. Excuse me? The man. Minho crossed his arms slowly. His voice had shifted, smooth now, deceptively level. The one who has you walking out of my house looking like that, at midnight. It's 8 o'clock, sir. It's midnight to me. She stared at him. 2 years had taught her to read Jiang Minho the way sailors learn to read weather. Right now, every instinct she had, every careful thing she had cultivated in this house, was screaming at her to tread carefully. His name is Daniel, she said, measured, quiet. He's a doctor. We met at the market 3 weeks ago. It's just dinner. Something moved across Minho's face, fast, a shadow crossing clear water, and then it was gone, replaced by the smooth, sealed mask she had spent 2 years learning to hate. Take off the dress, cancel the date. The words landed flat, Kate's lips parted. What? I need the east wing dusted by morning. Important guests arriving. She stared at him. The east wing had been closed for 4 months, sheets over the furniture, no foot traffic, no bookings, nothing. They both knew it. Mr. Jiang, she said, and her voice had gone very quiet in the way that meant she was holding something back by sheer force. You cannot. I just did. He turned. Walked back toward the study without another word, without a glance over his shoulder, as if the conversation had already been filed and closed and forgotten before it had even finished. At the door, he paused, did not turn around. And Kate? A beat. She didn't answer immediately. Sir. Next time you plan to leave this house dressed like that? A pause, long, waited. Tell me first. The door closed behind him. The sound of it was soft, which somehow made it worse. Kate stood alone in the foyer. The chandelier hummed faintly overhead. She became aware, slowly, that her hands were shaking, and recognized with a sinking clarity that it was not fear causing it. Fear she could have managed, fear she knew how to put down and walk away from. This was something else, something she had been carefully not naming for the better part of 2 years. She pulled out her phone, stared at Daniel's name for a moment. Something came up. I'm sorry, she sent it before. Yeah, she could reconsider. Then she looked up at the closed study door, the thin line of amber light visible beneath it, evidence that he was still there, still awake, still just on the other side of a door neither of them would open, and felt something give way, quietly, in the center of her chest. She did not move for a long time. She didn't change out of the dress. It was a small rebellion, silent, private, entirely her own. If the night had been taken from her, she could at least keep the burgundy silk. She pulled on her gloves, tied her apron over the gown. Ridiculous, she knew, and she knew it even as she did it, and made her way to the east wing with a dust cloth and the particular focused energy of a woman converting fury into productivity. Each swipe across the furniture was a sentence she would never say out loud. The east wing hadn't been used in months. The sheets had barely settled back over the chairs before she was lifting them again. At 9:30, she heard footsteps in the corridor. Minho appeared in the doorway of the east wing sitting room. He had a glass of whiskey in hand, his tie loosened, his jacket shed somewhere between the study and here. He looked, for the first time in the 2 years she had worked in this house, like a man who had wandered somewhere without a plan. He stopped when he saw her, apron strings tied neatly over the burgundy dress, hair still pinned, gloves still on, and something faint and unreadable moved through his expression before he locked it down. "You didn't change." He stepped into the room the way he moved through every room in his life. He crossed to where she stood and stopped 3 feet away. She could feel him studying her face. "You're angry." "I'm working." "Kate." "I'm working, Mr. Jang." He reached out slowly, giving her every opportunity to step back, she noticed, and hated that she noticed, and found the apron strings at her back. His fingers didn't linger. He simply untied them with the same deliberate efficiency he applied to everything, and the apron fell away from the front of the dress and dropped. The burgundy returned to its full effect beneath the dim glow of the east wing lamps. He looked at it for one unguarded second, one honest, helpless second that he clearly had not budgeted for, and then lifted his eyes away. "You should have been able to go," he said. His voice was quieter than usual, rougher at the edges. It wasn't an apology. Jang Minho did not apologize. She understood that about him the way she understood other fixed, immovable things, but it was the closest approximation she had ever heard from him, and it landed with more weight than she was prepared for. She turned to look at him fully for the first time since he'd entered the room. "Then why didn't you let me?" He met her gaze, and the answer was there. She could see it, plain and undefended and almost frightening in its clarity, sitting right behind. His eyes where he hadn't managed to bury it fast enough. It was there for just a moment, long enough. He didn't say it. Instead, he reached down, lifted the apron from the floor, and folded it with quiet, careful hands into a neat square. Set it on the mantelpiece beside his whiskey glass. Aligned the edge, something to do with his hands. "Finish when you're ready," he said. His voice had gone rough in a way she chose not to examine too closely. "You can have tomorrow night." He was nearly at the door. She could see him almost making it, almost clearing the room cleanly, when she spoke. "He's going to ask me again, you know." She didn't look at him. "Daniel, he's going to ask me to dinner again." Minho's hand came to rest against the doorframe. His back stayed to her. The room held its breath for several long seconds. "I know," he said. Then he was gone. His footsteps faded down the corridor, measured and even, giving nothing away. Kate pressed her palm flat against her sternum and stood very still and breathed. 3 days later, Daniel showed up at the gate. She hadn't told him where she worked. She never told anyone she worked for Jang Minho. The reasons were numerous, obvious, and none of them required elaboration. And yet, 3 days after the east wing, 3 days after the apron and the untied strings and the answer she'd seen in his eyes that he'd refused to speak aloud, Daniel appeared at the gate. He stood at the intercom with a bouquet of sunflowers, smiling directly and without a trace of self-consciousness at the security camera. Completely unaware or completely unbothered by the fact that the gate he was buzzing belonged to one of the most dangerous men in the city. Kate saw it on the kitchen monitor and felt her stomach drop clean through the floor. She stood there for a moment, hand braced against the counter, making the calculation. If she didn't buzz him through, someone else on staff would notice and report it. If she called him on the intercom, Minho might hear. If she did nothing, she buzzed him through before the window for her own choice could close. She was outside and down the garden path in under 2 minutes, moving quickly, smoothing her uniform with one hand and doing a single involuntary scan of the upper windows of the main house before she could catch herself. "Daniel," she kept her voice low, "you can't be here. You've canceled on me twice." He said it without accusation, laughing, entirely at ease in the way of a man who had never had genuine reason to doubt his own welcome anywhere. He extended the flowers toward her, sunflowers, bright and slightly oversized, the kind that made it impossible to receive them with a straight face. "I'm a doctor. I understand emergency. I do not understand ghost." She had mentioned sunflowers once, At the market, 3 weeks ago, in passing, while reaching past a display to examine something else entirely. He had been listening. He had filed it away. He had stood in a flower shop and chosen these specifically, and the sincerity of that small act landed somewhere in her chest before she had a chance to be guarded about it. "These are beautiful," she said, and took them. "You're beautiful," he said in the same easy, unhurried tone, not a line, just the most available fact. "Have dinner with me, Saturday. I'm not accepting canceled. I'm not accepting anything that isn't yes." He smiled at her, warm, uncomplicated, asking nothing difficult, and she felt, for a brief suspended moment, what it might feel like to live a life that was easy. A life without pressure readings and silent storms and answers that lived in someone's eyes and never made it to their mouth. "Saturday," she said. His smile widened. "Saturday." Upstairs, in the west-facing study, Yang Minho stood at the window with both hands in his pockets. He had been working. There were papers on the desk behind him, calls he had not returned, decisions that required his attention and were not getting it. He watched the man in the garden hand her the flowers, watched her take them, watched her look down at them with the particular softness she almost never allowed herself inside this house, watched her tuck a loose strand of hair behind her ear, that small, absent gesture she made when she felt for a moment like no one was watching. He was watching. His jaw worked once, slowly. A muscle in his cheek tightened and released. He turned from the window. "Hyunwoo." His voice was level, unbothered, the careful, practiced calm of a man who had spent decades making sure nothing showed on the surface. The man behind him straightened. "Boss?" "The doctor." "Daniel." A pause, flat and quiet. "Find out everything." A pause, brief, but not nothing. "The doctor. His name is Daniel." He moved back toward the desk, lowering himself into his chair with the controlled ease of a man resuming a meeting that had never technically adjourned. "Find out everything. Where he works, where he lives, where he trained, who he knows, everything. By tomorrow." Hyunwoo nodded once and was gone. Minho picked up the papers on his desk and did not read a single word on them. Saturday came. Kate was ready. She chose the burgundy dress again. Not by accident, not the way the first time had been, a private evening that was never meant to be witnessed. This time, it was deliberate. A decision made with both hands open and her eyes clear, in the small mirror above her dresser in the staff quarters, in the particular quiet of a woman who has decided to stop apologizing for wanting something. She did her makeup carefully. She told herself she deserved a simple dinner with a kind man. She told herself this was normal and uncomplicated and fine. She was halfway down the main staircase when Minho stepped out of the drawing room. He looked up. The foyer stilled the way it did in the moments before lightning. Everything present, nothing yet broken. She kept walking. Chin level, pace even, eyes meeting his without flinching, because she had never once flinched from him, and she was not about to begin now. "I have the night off," she said before he could draw breath. "You confirmed it yourself Thursday." Rosalie was standing at the kitchen door. She heard. Minho said nothing. He watched her reach the bottom step, and then, with the slow, deliberate attention of a man who had been holding something at arm's length for a very long time and was beginning to lose the strength of his grip on it, his gaze moved over the dress. It wasn't careless. It wasn't quick. It was the look of someone finally allowing themselves to see something they had been carefully not looking at for 2 years. "Kate." His voice was different. She heard it immediately. The authority was gone, the smooth professional distance stripped away, leaving something underneath that was quieter and considerably more dangerous. "Take off that dress." She went still on the bottom step. He moved toward her. 3 slow, unhurried steps closing the distance between them until she could see the exact expression on his face, which was not the cold mask, not the boardroom calm, not anything she had a name for. And she didn't back away because she never backed away from him, but her breath had gone somewhere entirely outside her body and she could not locate it. "Excuse me?" The words came out barely above a whisper. "Not—" He stopped, pressed his mouth closed. Then, in a motion she had never once witnessed in 2 years, he dragged a hand back through his hair. Jang Minho, composed at gunpoint, composed in rooms where men wept and begged, standing in his own foyer looking briefly and entirely undone. There's something. In the drawing room. It arrived today. I need you to... He turned, walked back through the drawing room door, and held it open without looking at her. His jaw was tight. His hand on the door was steady because he would allow himself that much. After a long moment, she followed. On the settee, positioned with the careful deliberateness of something that had been placed and repositioned and placed again, sat a dress box. Ivory, substantial, tied with a wide black ribbon. A small card was tucked beneath the bow, her name on it, in his handwriting, the same precise, controlled script she had seen on household schedules and staff memos for 2 years, now written on something that had nothing to do with either. She looked at him. He looked at the window, at the middle distance, at anything that was not her face. "Open it," he said. Inside the box was a gown. Not just any gown, the kind that existed in an entirely different tax bracket from anything Kate had ever touched, had ever stood close enough to touch. Deep emerald silk, long and fluid, structured precisely at the shoulders with the quiet confidence of something designed by someone who understood that true elegance never announces itself. Beneath the foyer chandelier, the fabric caught the light and held it, and the burgundy dress she was wearing, the dress she had chosen with both hands open as an act of defiance, suddenly felt like a warm-up act, a rehearsal for something she hadn't known was coming. There was a small jewelry box beneath it. She opened it with careful fingers. Simple gold earrings, a delicate chain, fine as a thread, both chosen with the particular restraint of someone who knew exactly what they were doing and refused to be excessive about it. Kate stood over the settee and looked at it for a long time without speaking. Then, quietly, without deciding to, Minho. She had never used his name. 2 years, and she had never once allowed herself that. It was always Sir, always Mr. Zhang, a border she had maintained with the same disciplined care he used to maintain his. It came out now without permission, soft and unguarded, and she heard what it cost her only after it had already left her mouth. He turned from the window. Something moved through his expression when he heard it, fast, honest, undefended, and then the wall came back up, not quite as high as usual, not quite as seamless. "There's an event tonight," he said. His voice was steady, practiced. "The Shin dinner. I require a..." "Don't." Her voice was quiet, not angry, something more careful than anger. "Don't make it about an event." He stopped. "Please," she added. Just that. The silence that followed was elastic and enormous, the kind that fills every corner of a room. The fire in the grate was the only sound. She looked at him and he looked at her, and the gown lay between them in its ivory box, waiting. Then Minho crossed the room. 4 steps, unhurried, and he stopped in front of her and looked at her, directly, fully, with none of the careful deflection she had spent 2 years watching him construct and maintain. It was the look of a man who had finally put something heavy down and was standing in the unfamiliar silence of having done so. "I don't want you to go to him in that dress," he said. "Why?" "Because..." The word frayed at the edge, a small thing, barely perceptible. But Zhang Minho's voice did not fray. She had heard him calmly instruct men twice his size and never once lose the thread. And so the barely perceptible thing was enormous. "Because every time I see you walk toward a door, I have to stop myself from..." His phone rang. He closed his eyes. 1 second. The specific stillness of a man exercising enormous restraint over something that has very little interest in being restrained. "Boss!" Hyunwoo's voice, clipped and urgent. "It's about the doctor. You need to hear this now." Minho opened his eyes. He looked at her. She looked at him. The gown lay in its box between them, the earrings in their velvet slot, the card with her name in his handwriting still tucked beneath, the ribbon. "I have to take this," he said. "I know," she said. Neither of them moved for another 3 seconds. 3 seconds in which everything that had almost been said continued existing in the air between them, unresolved and full of weight. Then he stepped away and brought the phone to his ear and was Zhang Minho again. What Hyunwoo found was this. Daniel was a doctor. That part was entirely true. What was also true was that Daniel was the personal physician of Kwon Seo-jun, Minho's most dangerous living rival, the man who had spent 4 years dismantling the Zhang Empire with the patient, architectural precision of someone playing a very long game. Minho sat at his desk with the file open in front of him and felt the particular cold clarity that came not from anger, but from the moment before anger, the still, calculating place where emotion had not yet arrived, and everything was simply information to be processed. He looked at Daniel's photo. He looked at the Koi connection. He turned it over the way he turned over every problem, methodically, from every angle, without flinching from any of them. He did not know yet whether Daniel had sought Kate out by design or whether she had simply been standing in the path of someone else's long, slow plan. He did not know, and not knowing was its own specific kind of intolerable. He called for her. She came into the study still wearing the burgundy dress, arms folded across her chest, not defensively. He had learned to read the difference, but in the particular way she held herself when she was already braced for something. Her eyes moved across the room the moment she entered, reading it the way she read him, quickly, quietly, missing nothing. "Sit down," he said. "Minho, Kate," a pause. "Sit down." She sat. Her eyes stayed on his face, not the desk. She would look at whatever he needed her to look at, when he needed her to look at it, and not a moment before. It was one of 100. Things about her that had made his job of not caring significantly more difficult. He placed Daniel's photograph on the desk between them, pulled from Kwan's organizational files, clear and unambiguous. He watched her face as she looked at it. He was very good at reading faces. It was a professional necessity that had saved his life on more than one occasion. He watched her take in the image, and he catalogued everything, the way her brow drew together, the small exhale through the nose, the particular quality of stillness that preceded genuine shock rather than performed surprise. No flicker of recognition, no micro-adjustment of someone recalibrating a story. She had not known. "You didn't know," he said. Not a question. "Who is he?" she whispered. "He works for a man who wants me dead." He kept his voice even, informational. "Whether he came to you by accident or by design, I don't know yet. But until I do," his jaw tightened, "you won't be seeing him." Kate looked up from the photograph. Her eyes were sharp with fury, the kind she didn't bother to temper when she felt she had the right to it. But underneath, close to the surface, not quite hidden, was something that looked very much like fear. Not for herself. He looked again and was almost certain it was not for herself. "You think I'm in danger?" "I think," he said carefully, "that anyone near me carries some degree of danger. That's not something I say lightly." He paused. His voice dropped, stepped down from the register he used for statements and into something considerably more private. "And I think I should have told you that before I let myself—" He stopped. Kate leaned forward in the chair. "Before you let yourself what?" The room was very quiet. His phone began to ring on the desk between them. He looked at it. He looked at her. For the first time in a professional life built on never missing a call, Yang Minho let it ring. "Before I let myself care about what happens to you," he said. "More than I'm supposed to." Daniel appeared at the estate gates the following Tuesday morning at 9:45, with an apology ready and more sunflowers in the particular energy of a man who had decided, somewhere between leaving and returning, that he wasn't done. He asked for Kate at the intercom with the polite persistence of someone who either had no idea what kind of house he was standing outside of, or had decided it didn't matter. Security looked at the camera feed, looked at each other, and called Minho. Minho listened. There was a pause that lasted exactly long enough to be deliberate. "Let him in," he said. Kate was informed. She appeared in the foyer 2 minutes later, still pulling her cardigan straight, and found Minho already positioned at the top of the grand staircase in the full quiet authority of a man who had chosen his ground carefully. She looked up at him. Her expression said, with perfect clarity and no words at all, "What are you doing?" He didn't answer it. Daniel was shown through by a staff member who wisely did not make eye contact with anyone and removed himself from the room immediately. Daniel stepped into the foyer and registered the space with the slight adjustment of a man recalibrating, the scale of the entrance hall, the quality of the light, the figure standing at the top of the staircase looking down at him with an expression of pleasant, absolute calm. "Dr. Daniel." Minho's voice carried easily down the stairs, warm and without edges, the specific warmth of something that cost nothing, because nothing behind it was uncertain. "I've heard about you. I'm Yang Minho." The color shifted in Daniel's face. Not a blush, a draining. The name landed the way it always landed with people who understood what it meant, which was everyone, eventually. Yes, sir. He recovered quickly, which told Minho something about him. I just wanted to see Kate. Minho began to descend, unhurried, each step measured, hands in his pockets as though this were any other Tuesday morning, and he had nowhere in particular to be. Of course, she's free to see whoever she chooses. I want to be clear about that. She's not a prisoner in this house. He reached the base of the stairs and stopped, 3 feet from Daniel, and looked at him, directly without performance, with eyes that had caused men with considerably more reason for confidence to take an involuntary step backward. I simply want to understand your intentions. Daniel held his ground, another mark in his favor, noted and filed. My intentions are honest, sir. I'd like to take her to dinner. I'd like to get to know her. A pause. That's all. And your employer? Minho tilted his head slightly, conversational. Kwon Seojun. Perhaps you could help me understand his intentions. What followed was a silence that was considerably more informative than any answer Daniel could have given. Minho watched it move through him. The way the name landed, the way his eyes went briefly unguarded, the rapid internal calculation of a man who was not practiced at deception and knew it. He watched all of it and made his assessment. The man was terrified, and he was genuine. Both things simultaneously and without contradiction. Daniel stopped, started again. My work has nothing to do with this, with her. I met her at a market. That was real. I believe you, Minho said, simply, and he meant it, which makes this harder, not easier. He was quiet for a moment. Someone put you in proximity to this house, to the people in it, whether you understood that or not. Whether they used you knowingly or not is almost beside the point. The point is that following this road puts her in a position I am not willing to put her in. He let that sit. Then, quietly, with the particular gentleness of a man delivering something final, I'm asking you not to contact Kate again, not because I have any claim over her choices. I don't. But because whoever set this in motion made her a variable in something she has no part in, and I won't allow her to remain one. Daniel was quiet for a moment. He looked past Minho's shoulder to where Kate stood in the corridor doorway. How long she'd been there, Minho didn't know, and his expression did something open and helpless and entirely sincere. The expression of a man who had genuinely liked someone and was being asked to understand why that wasn't enough. Then he looked back at Minho. And Minho, who had spent a lifetime ensuring that his face gave away nothing that he had not decided to give, watched Daniel look at him the way people rarely did. Not at the name, not at the authority, but past all of it, at the thing underneath that Minho had not intended to leave visible. Daniel's voice, when it came, was quiet. Not an accusation, just the simple recognition of someone who was, after all, a man trained to identify what he was, looking at. You love her. Minho said nothing. The foyer was very still. Daniel nodded once, a small, complete gesture, a man closing a door he'd realized was never open to him. He turned, set the sunflowers on the foyer table with a care that said he'd meant them, and walked out. The front door closed behind him, soft and final. The silence that followed was a different shape from any silence that had come before it. Kate stepped out of the corridor doorway. She looked at the sunflowers on the table. She looked at Minho. Minho, she said. Don't, he said quietly. You just sent away the only uncomplicated thing in my life. I know. A beat. She looked at him steadily, with all the directness she'd never once withheld from him in 2 years. So what does that make you? He turned to look at her, and for the first time in a very long time, perhaps the first time, if he was being honest with himself, Jang Minho had absolutely no answer. That night, she put on the emerald gown. She couldn't have explained it precisely, not in any way that would have satisfied a reasonable person. Maybe it was the week of it sitting in the box, the question of it quietly consuming her every time she passed the drawing room door. Maybe it was Daniel's sunflowers still on the foyer table, already beginning to droop. Maybe it was the memory of Minho's face when he had no answer, that rare, exposed blankness, the most honest thing she'd ever seen from him, and the way it had stayed with her through 4 days of professional distance and careful routine, like a splinter she couldn't locate but couldn't stop feeling. She lifted the gown from the box, stepped into it, reached back and fastened it herself, slowly, in the quiet of the empty drawing room. Then she stood in front of the tall mirror, gold-framed floor-length, the kind of mirror that had witnessed a century of this family's careful performances, and looked at herself for a long, still moment. It fit her as though it had been made for her body specifically, every seam, every line, the precise fall of the silk across her shoulders. She had suspected it when she first opened the box. Standing in the mirror now, she was certain. She was still looking at her own reflection when she heard the door open behind her. Minho stopped in the doorway. She watched him in the mirror, watched the moment he saw her, watched what it did to his face before he had any opportunity to do anything about it. It was the most unguarded she had ever seen him, fully, helplessly unguarded, the controlled mask not slipped, but simply absent, as though it had never occurred to him to reach for it. He looked like a man seeing something he had imagined so many times that the reality of it had temporarily suspended his capacity for function. Then he stepped inside. She heard the soft, deliberate click of the lock. He crossed the room toward her slowly, not with the authority he carried. Everywhere else, not commanding, not certain, but with the careful, almost tentative movement of someone approaching something they have waited a very long time for and refused to frighten away. He stopped close behind her, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him, feel the slight shift in the air. They looked at each other in the mirror, 2 years of careful distance reflected back at them in gold. "I had it made," he said. His voice was low, stripped back to something she'd only heard in fragments before now. 3 weeks ago, after the first night I stopped you at the door." She held his gaze in the glass. "Why?" "Because I couldn't stop thinking about you in a room where you belonged." A pause, and in the pause, the whole weight of what he hadn't been saying for 2 years. Not as staff, not as... He stopped, started again. As you, just you, in a room that was worthy of you. "Minho," she said his name the way she'd been carefully not saying it. "I work for you." "I know. You're..." She gestured, a small motion that encompassed the room, the house, the empire the house represented, the city that moved differently when his name was spoken in it. "I know," he said again. The repetition wasn't deflection, it was acknowledgement, full, clear-eyed, without excuse. "This doesn't make sense." "No," he agreed quietly, "it doesn't make any sense at all." His hand came up slowly, giving her every moment to see it coming, to decide, and came to rest against her shoulder, barely touching. The lightest possible pressure, more question than statement. In the mirror, his eyes found hers and stayed there. "Tell me to unlock the door," he said, "and I will, right now, no argument." She looked at his reflection, at this man who had sent rooms full of dangerous people into silence, who had commissioned a gown in her exact measurements and said nothing about it for 3 weeks, who had let a phone ring for the first time in his professional life to tell her something true. She looked at all of it, held in the glass between them. She did not tell him to unlock the door. "Why emerald?" she said instead, softly. "Of all colors." Something in his face opened, past the discipline, past the careful architecture of a man who had spent decades deciding what to show and what to bury. And what was underneath was so unguarded it almost hurt to look at directly. "Because you deserve to be seen," he said. "Every color, every room, every night you've spent in this house making yourself quiet and small and invisible, because that was the rule I gave you." His jaw tightened with something that looked very much like remorse. "Not just by me, but by you first," she said, barely above a whisper. He closed his eyes. The admission moved through him visibly, a man surrendering something he'd held for a very long time. "By me first," he said. "Always first. I'm sorry." She turned around. Whatever either of them had been about to say next dissolved completely, because they were close, truly close, the distance between them a matter of inches, and the locked door was behind him and the mirror was behind her, and 2 years of careful, practiced, mutually maintained distance had collapsed all at once into this single point. She could see every detail of his face, the slight tension at his jaw, the absolute honesty in his eyes that he was no longer doing anything to conceal. Her phone buzzed on the settee. They both looked at it. The moment held, then shifted. The screen read, Kate Duwan. She picked it up, because Kate had never been the kind of woman who let fear of anything, of anyone, determine her choices. That was not how she was built. She answered. Kwan Seojin's voice was smooth and educated, with the particular coldness of men who have learned to make coldness sound like courtesy. Polished, patient, the voice of someone accustomed to taking a very long time to win. Miss Kate, forgive the intrusion at this hour. I believe you've been told about me. Behind her, Minho's hand closed around her wrist. Not restraining, she registered this immediately, and it mattered. Steadying. The grip of someone who was leaving the decision entirely with her and simply making sure she knew she wasn't standing alone. What do you want? She said. Only to offer you something Minho never will, Kwan said pleasantly. Freedom. A life conducted on your own terms, in your own name, not in a uniform in someone else's house. I can offer you considerably more than that, if you're willing to be reasonable about it. And Daniel? Was never intended to cause you any harm. A brief pause, the pause of a man selecting his words with care. Merely to determine whether Zhang had any softness remaining, any vulnerability worth noting. Another pause. It seems he does. Minho's hand tightened fractionally around her wrist. Kate looked at the phone in her hand. Then she looked at Minho, at his face, inches from hers, that unguarded and terrifying honesty still fully present in his eyes, not retreating, not reaching for the mask. She thought about the gown, the apron strings, untied with careful hands, the whiskey glass set on the mantelpiece, forgotten, the key placed on the settee instead of turned in the lock. Every almost of 2 years, laid end to end. Mr. Kwan, she said, her voice was even and clear, I'm going to give you exactly one piece of free advice. A beat. Oh? Stop using people who don't know they're being used. It says considerably more about the state of your operation than you'd want anyone to know. She ended the call, set the phone face down on the settee, looked at Minho. He was staring at her with an expression she had no existing category for, somewhere between astonishment and something much larger than astonishment. Yes. He's not someone I know who he is. Kate, that was Minho. He stopped. She looked at him steadily, with all the directness she had never once withheld from him in 2 years, through every difficult silence and every almost said thing and every morning of black uniform and careful invisibility. If you want me in this house, she said, want me in this house, not in a uniform, not invisible, not almost. Her voice was quiet and it did not shake. And if you're not ready for that, unlock the door right now and I'll pack my things in the morning and we'll both go back to pretending this was nothing. The silence that followed was the longest of 2 years. Minho reached into his pocket. He set the key down on the settee beside her phone. Then he stepped forward and took her face in both hands, carefully, with the deliberate gentleness of a man handling something he intends to protect for the remainder of his life, and pressed his forehead to hers. His eyes closed. I've been ready, he said. The roughness in his voice was not performed. I've been ready, and I've been afraid you would choose the simpler life, the easier man, someone who could give you a normal evening and sunflowers and nothing complicated. Zhang Minho, she said softly. Her hands came up and rested against his chest, feeling his heartbeat underneath her palms, steady and fast all at once. Nothing about you has ever been easy. No, he agreed. Good thing, she said, that I'm not here for easy. He pulled back just far enough to look at her face, to really look, without the mirror between them, without distance or pretense or 2 years of careful managed nothing. Then, slowly, like something long held finally released, the most controlled man in 3 cities smiled, real, quiet, rare, only for her. The dress, War, he said, what about it? It's yours, all of it. His thumbs traced her cheekbones gently. The gown, the house, everything in it. He held her face the way you hold an answer to a question you've been asking alone for a very long time. If you'll have it. She looked at him for a long, considering moment, drawing it out just slightly because she had earned it, because 2 years entitled her to at least that much. Ask me properly, she said. Later. Later. After dinner. She stepped back with the authority of a woman who has just quietly rearranged the entire architecture of a powerful man's world and found it entirely natural. She smoothed the emerald silk, picked up her clutch, and glanced back at him over her shoulder, dark eyes warm, mouth curved at the corner. "You're taking me somewhere nice. And Minho?" He was already watching her. "You can unlock the door now." He laughed, low, quiet, surprised completely out of him, the laugh of a man who had forgotten he was capable of it. He reached for the key. Dinner was quiet at first, not because there was nothing to say, but because for the first time neither of them was hiding behind anything. No sir, no careful. No distance. No pretending this was temporary. Just Minho and Kate sitting across from each other in a private room high above the city, the lights below them soft and distant, like a different life entirely. He hadn't taken her somewhere loud or extravagant. That would have been easy, predictable. Instead, he chose somewhere calm, intentional, a place where she could be seen without being watched. And he did see her. Not in quick, controlled glances like before, not in stolen seconds. He looked at her openly now, like he was still slightly stunned she was actually there. Kate noticed. Of course she did. "You're staring," she said, lifting her glass, a small smile playing at her lips. "I've been doing that for 2 years," he replied calmly. "You're only just allowing me to do it properly." She shook her head, but she didn't look away. That was the difference. Before, everything between them had been almost. Now, nothing was. By the time dessert came, the tension had changed shape, softer, warmer, dangerous in an entirely different way. "Minho," she said, setting her spoon down, her voice gentler now. "If I say yes, this doesn't stay like this." "It won't," he said immediately. "No control, no orders disguised as requests, no locking doors." His gaze held hers, steady. "You'll have none of that from me again. And I'm not staying as staff," she added, "not like before." A pause, not hesitation, consideration. Then he nodded. "You won't be staff," he said. "You'll be whatever you choose to be in this house." Her brow lifted slightly. "That sounds dangerously undefined." "It is," he agreed, "but I think you'll like defining it yourself." That, more than anything, was what made something in her finally settle. Not the power, not the house, not even him, the choice. When they returned that night, the estate felt different. Or maybe it was just them. The foyer, the same place where everything had started, where arguments had lived and silences had stretched too long, no longer felt like a battlefield. It felt like a beginning. Kate stepped inside first, slipping off her heels with a quiet sigh. Minho watched her like he was memorizing something simple and precious. "Comfortable?" he asked. "Finally," she said. A beat. Then she turned to him. "Well?" He tilted his head slightly. "Well, what?" "You were supposed to ask me properly." Something softened in his expression, something rare, something real. He walked toward her slowly, stopping just close enough. No rush, no pressure, just certainty. "Kate," he said, her name quieter now, like something he intended to keep. "Stay, not because you work here, not because it's easier." A small pause. "Stay because you want to build something with me, something that's yours as much as it is mine." Her eyes searched his face, for doubt, for control, for anything that looked like the man he used to be with her. She didn't find it, only him. "Okay," she said softly, not dramatic, not drawn out, just real. And that was enough. The changes didn't happen overnight. They happened in small, quiet ways. Her uniform disappeared, not abruptly, but gradually, replaced by clothes she chose for herself. She stopped knocking before entering certain rooms, started giving opinions no one in that house had ever dared to give him. And Minho listened, really listened. Staff noticed first, then the city. Because Jiang Minho was still powerful, still dangerous. But there was something new now, a shift, a line he would not allow crossed anymore, and everyone knew exactly where that line stood. Weeks later, the East Wing was open again, not for guests, for her. Sunlight filled the rooms now. The sheets were gone. The space that once held silence and almost confessions now held something entirely different. Laughter, music, the quiet rhythm of a life being built. Kate stood by the window one evening, looking out over the gardens. Minho came up behind her, resting a hand at her waist. Familiar now, natural. "No apron," he murmured. She smiled slightly. "Progress." "No running off to doctors." "Definitely progress." He huffed a quiet laugh, pressing a brief kiss to her shoulder. Simple, unguarded. Then, after a moment, "I meant what I said," he added. "Everything in this house is yours too." She turned in his arms, looking up at him. "I don't want everything," she said. "Then what do you want?" Her answer came easily. "You." No hesitation, no almost, just truth. And for a man who had spent his entire life controlling outcomes, calculating risks, and anticipating loss, that was the one thing he had never been able to secure. Until now. Minho smiled, soft, rare, entirely hers, and pulled her closer. Outside, the city continued its endless motion. Inside, for the first time in years, nothing felt like it was about to be taken away. Everything that had once been restrained, unspoken, unfinished, had finally found its way to something whole. And this time, neither of them let go.